morning, everyone. Welcome to the OBS VAP Training Center webinar, Grant Writing 101, or Writing a Winning Grant Proposal. I'm Bush, Director of Training Outreach for OBS, and today's webinar is a part of a series of webinars we've offered through the OBS VAP Training Center. The webinar will be led by Jennifer Amstutz of JA Strategies and Alan Krieger of Krieger Solutions. Jenny and Alan have more than 40 years of combined experience in consulting and training with nonprofits and agencies around the state of New York. Jen and Alan have served as executive directors of nonprofit organizations and both have master's degrees in management. Please note that today's webinar is a general grant writing webinar, not specifically related to the upcoming OBS RFA, though there will be plenty of valuable information that can be used. As soon as you exit today's webinar, you'll be directed to an evaluation survey on today's presentation. Take a couple minutes to give us feedback. There you will also have an opportunity to notify us if you're interested in receiving more training and follow-up on this or a variety of other training topics. That said, I'd like to formally welcome Jenny and Alan.
Thank you. Before we get started, I want to take a minute to orient you to the screen if you haven't used WebEx before. Across the top of the screen, you should see a blue banner. If you click that, you will see that you have an opportunity for a chat box there. During the program today, if you have any specific questions or comments, please feel free to enter them into the chat box. We'll monitor those and answer them as we can. We'll also have some time at the end of the webinar to address any questions or comments that you have. You may also see a question and answer box there, but it would be great if you kept your questions in the chat box so we only have to monitor one thing. And during today's webinar, you'll also be given the opportunity to participate in an online poll. When we open the poll, a box will pop up on the right-hand side of your screen, and you'll be able to click the answers. Hopefully some of you heard Blake mention before the webinar started that you can download the slides from today's webinar through the file transfer box. If you've closed out of your screen already, you can get back into it across the top of your screen, and then we'll have it pop up again at the end of the webinar so you can see that. Now I'm going to turn it over to Alan.
Okay, she's done a lot of grant writing and training in her career, so I'm just going to share with us what goes into a good grant proposal. Some tips on things we should keep in mind during the planning and writing process. This hour, we're going to talk about how to find new grant opportunities, steps are in writing a proposal, how models can help describe your program, what to include in each section of the proposal, how to adapt your proposal to specific funders, what creating a grant budget, and important points to remember when writing a good proposal. I hope this addresses what you wanted to learn. If there's anything you were hoping we would cover today that is not on this list, please use the chat box to let us know. Also know if you have any specific challenges or issues with grant writing. Okay, so the poll is going to pop up in just a minute. We want a sense of how much experience people have with grant writing. There'll be three choices: considerable, limited, or none. So as the poll pops up, please choose your selection. If there's more than one of you at a computer, you can make two choices. Okay, here it comes. We'll close the poll in just a few seconds. If you haven't voted, please finish voting.
Oh, most people haven't. Let's see if we can close. So you should have the in your screen showing
But we have quite a few with no or very little experience. That's great. We're going to fill you with a lot of information today. So, again, please feel free to chat in if you're having questions. We've got quite a few with considerable experience and some with limited experience. We have a nice range of expertise, and we will be covering, the basics here and hopefully getting into a couple more advanced topics as well. Okay. All right, Jenny, many of us have written and read a lot of grant proposals in our careers. Some have been pretty good, and some have been not so good. What would you say defines a good grant proposal?
If you look at the official definition of a well-written proposal, you can see it here. It's a clearly stated, well-coordinated plan of activities designed to provide measurable solutions or outcomes to a specific problem and to accomplish social and or economic benefits for a target population. If you want to put that a little more simply, really a proposal is an outline of your program stating the benefit it will provide and then requesting money to support it. It is you making your case for why someone should fund the program or project. A broader sense, propose vehicles to introduce people to who you are and why what you do addresses the goals of any given funder. So first and foremost, proposals should be prepared with those people and those funders in mind. You want to write your proposal assuming that the reader doesn't know anything about your organization or the program for which you are requesting money. The proposal should include all the information that a person needs to understand who you are and the activities that make up your program. You don't want somebody interrupting his or her reading to Google the meaning of an acronym you used or further understands one of your program delivery methods that you mentioned. Finally, proposal should be prepared with a specific funder in mind. It should reflect that funder's own grant-giving priorities and goals. You also don't want the reader to have to figure out how your program is going to connect to their giving priorities. You want to make that leap for them.
A lot that goes into writing a good proposal. Can you give a quick overview of the process? What does that look like?
So look at this flow chart, or really arrow. You can see that you want to begin with a logic model for your program. That will help you clarify your program outcomes and objectives, and it will identify the actual funding needs you have for the program itself. You then use that information to find prospective grants that will fund your specific type of program within the dollar range that you are looking for. Based on your own schedule and the earliest application deadline for the funders you have identified, you will develop your grant writing timeline. And once that timeline is in place, you can begin developing the actual grant proposal.
Included both a general proposal and a specific, more tailored proposal in the flow chart. Can you explain the difference?
Sure. If you're looking for funding from a variety of different sources or foundations for the same program, it's the easiest to develop one general grant proposal for the program that includes all the relevant information and all the components of the grant. Do that at the beginning, and once you have that in place, you'll be able to individually tailor that proposal to meet guidelines and needs of each different funder. So from that one general grant proposal, you might develop 6 or 10 slightly different proposals. Sometimes you might just be developing one proposal, especially if that is an especially large government RFA. So you'd be able to skip writing the general grant proposal and stick to the tailored proposal.
You mentioned RFA, a request for applications. As one later, it's important to clarify all jargon. So let's point out other acronyms for this. Instead of A, it could be an RFP, which is a request for a proposal, an RFQ, request for a quote, or an RFI, which is for information, which is often a precursor to the RFA or RFP. Okay, back to writing the proposal. Since the model is the first step, let's start by reviewing that. Those of you today who've been part of our evaluation training or evaluation webinar have already been talking about developing logic models. Jenny, give us a quick recap of what a logic model is and how it connects to the grant writing process.
A model is a short visual depiction of your program showing what your program will do, its activities and outputs, and what is designed to accomplish, its outcomes. A model is made up of 3 main areas: inputs, outputs, and outcomes. Inputs in a logic model are the resources such as staff, money, and materials that are necessary to put your program into effect. The outputs in a logic model are the actual activities that the organization undertakes in order to achieve its purpose. and products of those activities. When about products, we're talking about things you generally report to OBS and other funders, and the people served or the hours of service that people received. The outputs measure the activities. The last piece of a logic model, the outcomes, are measures of the desired impact and benefit that will result from program outputs and activities. The model is usually depicted either in a table or a flowchart format with arrows depicting the causal relationships. The arrows represent the if-then nature of your program design. Invest these dollars in the program, we will be able to provide these services. If we provide these services, we will be able to achieve these specific results. To some degree, our grant proposal is going to be a long narrative of our logic model, but in reverse. If these goals and outcomes and achieve these results, we will have the following services activities. And to provide those results, we need to raise, or we are asking you to invest a certain amount. By creating the logic model before we start our grant proposal, we will already have a short outline of what our proposal needs to include, and we will determine the amount of money we need to raise to implement the program. If you've used your logic model to help you outline your program and determine the type and amount of funding you are looking for, it's time to find funders. In some communities, the local foundations are well known, but for some, it may require a bit more digging.
The Foundation Center has always been a great resource for searching for grants and grant information. Is that still the case?
Yes, the Foundation Center has a huge online directory with links to private foundations, and they have some free search capabilities. A subscription, which is $50 a month, do far more search functions and may be worth a month or two subscription to do some intensive research. The Foundation Center also has a subsidiary service, grantspace.org, where you can find additional training and resources related to writing grants and grant proposals. They have a free webinar that includes guided grant research. If you don't want to spend the money on the subscription, it may be worth looking for one of the Foundation Center's partners as part of the Funding Information Network. Network members, which include many libraries, are Foundation Center partners, and you can access the online database and other Foundation resources at those locations. To the Foundation Center online, there are other online resources. If you're of a larger organization with a subscription to the newspaper, the Chronicle of Philanthropy, you have access to the Grant Station database, which is another large grant database. Like Foundation Center online database, this information is only available with a subscription to the Chronicle or subscription to Grant Station itself. Grant Station sometimes has a $99 subscription available on the TechSoup website, but you need to be watching for it. Grantmain is another paid database that is part of the Grantmanship Center. However, if you go to the Grantmanship Center website, tgci.com, you will be at least able to access some reports, including those with some of the larger foundations in New York, as well as a list of community foundations and corporate giving foundations. Those are free. The rest of the website, as I said, you need a subscription for.
I don't want to pay for access to one of these local databases. Where else can I look?
Well, it's a huge resource if you can get creative with your search terms. First, if you Google grants plus domestic violence plus Albany, you will see information about various grants that have been given in Albany related to domestic violence. In addition to regular Google searches, look for your local community foundation if you haven't already. Community foundations have grant programs, and some offer information about other local grants. You'll have a local grant maker organization in your area made up of the representatives from your local foundations. In New York, there are a couple of real grant-making organizations. In New York City, that organization is Philanthropy New York, and update it is called the New York Funders Alliances. Funders Alliance. If you are looking for government grants, you have access to the resources for those as well. The catalog of federal and domestic assistance .gov is a good resource for those federal grants. And New York State, always check the New York State Grants Gateway page, which is where all New York State procurements and grants are advertised. It is grantsreform.newyork.gov. Watching through a database or just using Google, remember to be creative in your search. Look who's been funding similar organizations in your community or similar programs in nearby communities. Many of the chain stores provide small grants in the communities they serve, so if you have a Target or a Walmart, a Hannaford, or a Wegmans in your community, check out their community giving pages.
should people look for when they're looking at foundations and looking at other funders?
Before you go on a specific foundation or funder and spend a lot of time crafting a proposal, make sure you've read through their websites and giving guidelines thoroughly. Does your program really fit within the criteria that they have set? Are they giving grants in your desired range? Some may be only looking for $15,000, and the fund generally gives much larger grants. More, you might be looking for $50,000, and a small foundation may be giving in much smaller amounts. So check grants from previous years to see if the funders are actually funding programs like yours in your geographic area. Some foundations are very specific about what they will and will not fund. Some fund new programs, but not existing ones. Some will pay for staff salaries. Some will not cover administrative costs. In cases such as those, only submit proposals to those funders if you are able to cover the unallowed costs from another source. Some might not be a new funder or a new grant. You might be submitting a renewal proposal for an existing grant or resubmitting for a grant which you were previously denied. It's still important to really read the guidelines. Some may have changed since the last time you applied. Things that weren't funded previously are now funded, or vice versa.
I know you also need to look closely at the other requirements in the guidelines. Many foundations and government grants require funding matches or meaningful collaborations with community partners.
Right. Those types of guideline requirements may impact your proposal development timeline if you need to secure those funds or create those collaborations. In collaborations, it also might change your logic model for delivering the program. Once we're way through the grant search process and found some potential funders, our next step is to create our timeline and action plan. From our grant writing process flowchart, our final step was to submit our grant on time or even early. Our proposal development timeline and action plan is a vital component of making sure that we can do that. A timeline is a step that most people leave out when they are getting ready to start a proposal.
I mean, this looks very similar to the timeline and action plans that we developed as part of our strategic plan and evaluation plan training, right?
Right.
Take a list of all the components of the grant, including anything that a specific grant guideline has included. That might include each part of your grant, the budget, and any letters of support. Next component, you need to list anyone who will need to be included in the grant development process. For the advisors that need to approve new programs, fiscal people that will need to provide information to develop the budget, staff to provide data or examples. Once that's through, then create your timeline, working back from the date you want the grant to be completed, and assign deadlines for each component. If you're requiring letters or information from external partners, or you have supervisors who need to sign off on various components, make sure you leave enough time for those pieces. The time is set. Make sure one involved gets a copy. Understand how their piece of the proposal and their deadline impacts on everyone else.
Perfect. There are other things that you might want to consider when developing your timeline. Funders are moving from a traditional paper proposal to an online submission. If that's the case with your proposed funder, make sure that you include a review of the online process as a step early in the timeline. You don't want to be at the gun to submit your proposal when you find out you don't understand how the website works or you have trouble setting up an account. Also, a note on the timeline if there's a pre-qualification or a inquiry required before submitting the proposal. Some funders will let you know how they are scoring your proposals. Maybe they give you more points for your program design and fewer for your budget. Allow time in your timeline for the sections of the proposal worth the most points. You certainly don't want to rush those.
Okay, we've done the research and laid out our plan. Now it's to actually write the proposal. We're on components of a grant proposal. We said that a proposal was a clearly stated, well-coordinated plan of activities designed to provide measurable solutions or outcomes to a specific problem in order to accomplish social and/or economic benefits for a target population. What are the various pieces that go into a grant proposal?
I need to have components that define each of the elements in our definition. This problem, the target population, the proposed activities, measurable outcomes, and how those outcomes will accomplish the social and/or economic benefits that you plan to address and that the funder has set as a priority. Just speaking, those components and a few more are included in most grant requirements. A proposal can be as simple as a one-page letter, but more than will have an executive summary, a statement of need or problem statement, an organizational background, the goals or outcomes of the program, the design, evaluation plan, a stability plan that will talk about future funding for the program, a budget and possibly budget narrative, and a list of key personnel involved in the project, a conclusion, and appendices or attachments.
Wow, a lot of components here. Should a grant proposal include each one?
Write a general grant proposal that you can adapt to many different funders, then you definitely write each of these sections so that you have it ready to tailor and adapt. If you're preparing a very specific grant for one specific funder, then you only need to write the sections that are included in the guidelines or in the RFA.
We'll spend time talking about each of these components. The proposal starts with an executive summary, but it's always the last part of the proposal that you write.
You're right, Alan. So we're going to talk about it here because it comes first in the submitted grant, but we did it after we've written the entire proposal. Depending on the length of the grant proposal itself, the executive summary may be a paragraph or it may be an entire page. A short summary of the organization, the problem statement, the goals, outcomes to be achieved, and a very brief description of the activities. It should also contain the actual dollar amount of the funding request that you're making to the particular foundation or funder. Next, talk about the organizational background. It comes later in the proposal, but for simplicity, I'm going to talk about it now.
This is where agencies demonstrate their qualifications to provide the program, history in the community, their mission, and the types of activities and services they're already providing in the community or target population. Agencies need to demonstrate their expertise and accomplishments with similar projects and capabilities to take on the proposed project.
You can also include any third-party support from elected officials or community agencies for the work that you do. The agency or program, the more important it is to get testimonials. Funders are concerned about how skilled, solid, and reliable you're going to be. However, you don't want to get bogged down in this section. You want to spend the bulk of your time on the sections related to the need for your program, the goals and outcomes, and the program design. Next, talk about the problem statement. This is where you're making the case for why your program or project is necessary. What is the problem that you are seeking to address with your program? It's a description of your target population, for instance, women between the ages of 18 and 24 in Schenectady County, and outside data that backs up your stated need. If other agencies are providing similar services in the geographic areas served, then what that gap is. If you need hard outside data, maybe census data or a locally funded needs assessment, it's great to include that here.
Okay, after the problem statement, the next section of the grant is the goals or outcomes section, where you talk about how you're going to address the problem. This is where you describe the impact the program will have on your target population. Because you have done your logic model, this should be pretty easy. What are some tips to keep in mind for this section?
It's important to link those outcomes back to the problem statement and be sure that the outcomes are SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. We spent a lot of time on developing measurable outcomes at our evaluation training. We'll spend time on it here. If you were able to participate in one of those trainings and are interested in receiving the program handouts from the training or any slides from the webinar, we will let you know at the end of the webinar, at the end of this webinar, how you can get them. Once you have your goals and outcomes, then it's time to move on to your program design.
I think this is a section where people often get lost. I've read proposals where I came away knowing the problem that the program is going to address, but I'm not exactly sure what the program is actually going to do to address it. They specify what activities or services clients will receive. When you list them, they don't always clearly connect the services to the goals or problem statement.
Alan, this is a section where you need to remember that you may be talking to somebody or writing for somebody who is totally unfamiliar with your program and your program delivery model. In this section that you should talk about your logic model, what the activities and services are that you will provide, and help you meet your outcomes. If they're existing evidence or data that shows the correlation between your activities and your desired outcomes, introduce that data here. This should also identify the specifics of the service delivery model. When, where, and how will the activities be provided? Who are the key staff that will provide the activities?
When someone reading this section, they should have a clear picture of how the program will operate and how it will help the target population, even if they've never heard of the program before. So that's also important, as we mentioned earlier, to avoid industry jargon and acronyms. What's the section people need to address?
Most applications require an evaluation plan. So you should create one that will demonstrate how you will measure your success and how you will know that you are meeting your goals. It's important to remember to be realistic. Don't propose an evaluation that you do not have the people or technical capacity to implement.
As said earlier, if you'd like more information about creating an evaluation plan for your program, make sure you pay attention at the end of the webinar for information about where you can get the evaluation handouts from our previous programs. I'm going to ask for a sustainability plan. Can you talk about what that is?
Applying for state or federal funds, you'll be able to reapply every few years to continue those funds. On the other hand, most foundation grant funds are temporary or one-time funding. Foundations really like to fund new or pilot programs. So they want to think that those programs will continue and grow even after their funding ends. The sustainability plan is the way you show funders how you will be able to continue the program after the end of the grant. It has to be convincing and it has to be realistic. You may be able to make up the funding from client fees, or you may be able to get reimbursements for insurance, from insurance, or you will get the funds from individual donors or business sponsors. You can include other grants if you believe your ability to secure those grants is relatively certain.
In sustainability, many funders require that you provide a match for a percentage of the funding request.
And unlike a sustainability plan, which is a plan for the future, a matching requirement is cash that you will need to have in hand to implement the program and to extend the grant funds. If requesting $100,000 and the funder requires a 25% match, then you have $25,000 in hand and be able to demonstrate that in your proposal. Remember, be realistic about the match you can generate. Make you understand any limitations. Does the match need to be actual cash in hand, or can it be in-kind services? These things are sometimes referred to as hard match and soft match. In-kind services, or the soft match, could include the value of the space your agency provides, the involvement of staff from outside the program that will assist with the program, volunteer time, supplies or equipment that is provided by the agency or others, and administrative support that's not billed to the program. So be sure to investigate if there are limits on where the matching funds originate. Some sole source matching requirements prohibit the use of other federal funds for the match. Finally, make sure you understand how the match should be calculated. If the requirement is a 25% match, make sure you understand if that means a 25% of the entire program cost or 20% of the grant request itself.
Okay, covering a lot. We're only about halfway through, so I hope the folks who are new to grant writing are able to follow all this. It's a lot of information, but again, the slides, if you have downloaded them now, they'll be available at the end to help you remember all the things we've covered. Section is the budget. How much will the program cost? How should the budget be set up?
Most ask for a total program budget and then break it down by what costs you are asking for from the funder and what costs will come from other sources. So first, create the total budget for the program. In other words, every cost that can be attributed to running the program as you've described it. Your costs are those that are specific to your program, such as how many program staff you will need and what you will pay them. There are supplies and program materials, training for staff, and travel. They should be included in the budget. Indirect costs are those costs related to running the agency, but not specific to your program alone. They're generally done as percentages and can include a percent of administrative or supervisor salary, overhead building costs like rent, utilities, and equipment.
Budgeting and allocating overhead and fixed costs is a big subject. It's probably a webinar in itself, but we don't have time for that today. Let us in the chat section if you have a specific question about this, or if this is something you'd like to have a webinar on in the future.
Your overall budget set, you divide into 3 categories or columns in your budget spreadsheet. The first is those costs that will be covered by the grant request. The second, other cash resources that will supplement the project. This might be where you include your required match. The third category is where you can show any in-kind resources that you will use for the program. Maybe it's donated by the landlord or somebody offers training to your staff for free. These are program expenses and should be reflected in the budget.
Okay, this slide shows an example of the budget as you just described it, but the funder will include their own budget form for inclusion, and that could look quite different.
Yeah, you should always use the format requested by the funder. The form we just reviewed will give you the information you need to understand the full cost of your program, and then it will help you transfer the information into the format that the funder requests. For your budget, make sure you run the budget by the people in your finance office. Help make sure it's realistic and that you haven't left anything out, like staff fringe benefits or liability insurance. Expenses should be reasonable. You artificially inflate them beyond what the program will need to run efficiently, but you also shouldn't lowball your numbers so that you can't fully implement the program the way you describe it in your program design. Make sure you follow the directions exactly for each individual funder. An important time to double check what a funder will and will not pay for, whether limits on training or whether they will only pay for staff but not for materials. Make sure that you keep your language and numbers consistent with your budget narrative as well as your program description. And check your spreadsheet formulas. You don't want to underestimate the cost of your program because your spreadsheet wasn't adding up correctly.
You mentioned the budget narrative. What is that, and do you have any hints for us on how to do it well?
Budget narrative is a brief explanation of the costs in your budget and how they relate to the program. It's here that you include how you calculated your costs, if you've already shown that in your actual budget. It's also called a budget justification. The narrative also gives you a chance to justify why you have included a specific expense. If any unusual expenditures in your budget, make sure you mention them in the narrative. Here's an example of the narrative for program counselors. You see that it shows the fact that the amount, $86,000, is based on 2 counselors, each earning $43,000. Then goes on to show how those counselors fit into the organizational structure and what their primary responsibilities will be related to the program. If $1,000 was extremely low or extremely high for a program counselor salary in your area, you would want to explain it here. In this case, the narrative indicates that the counselor will have a master's degree.
Wow, a lot that goes into writing a grant proposal. That's why it's important to develop a realistic timeline. Grants are usually not flexible. We've covered a lot so far, but I hate to ask, is there anything else?
Just a conclusion. This should be brief. A paragraph is generally enough. Here we state why you need the funds, your problem statement, and the impact that those funds and the program will have on the target population and the community.
While inclusion is brief, it's also important. It gives you an opportunity to restate your key points and make your final pitch. Now that the proposal is complete, tailor it to fit specific funders you uncovered during your grant research.
Read and reread the proposal instructions or guidelines for the funder to whom you are tailoring the proposal, and follow those instructions to the letter. This means the length of the proposal, what needs to be included, and the guidelines for the types of programs they fund. Write in exactly the format the funder requests. You are submitting 5 requests to 5 funders, and 4 of them ask for the organizational background first, and the 5th put the end, move in for that 5th funder. Don't make them search. Also, use the language that the funder uses. The funder uses the word victim as the beneficiaries of their funding, and your agency prefers to use the word survivor. Switch the proposal to read victim in this request. There's a strong reason why you feel you cannot change the language. Clearly explain that in your proposal, but do it in a way that does not sound judgmental. As mentioned earlier, match the size of your request to the funder guidelines. If the typical grants are between $1,000 and $5,000, don't ask for $20,000. If you still have questions after reading through the guidelines more than once, contact the grant officer with questions. But please only do this if you're sure that the answers are not already in the guidelines.
I've finished my proposal. Anything more I should do?
You've almost finished your draft. Time for editing. There are a number of things that you want to look for. Make sure you stay away from negativity in your proposal. Focus on positive. Try and eliminate all fluff. That is all unnecessary information that may cloud the proposal. I'll try and eliminate the redundancy. Don't do the same thing over and over. Make your proposal as easy to read. All the words with subheadings and bullets, short paragraphs and sentences. And make sure you standardize your fonts. We all do a lot of cutting and pasting when we write grants, and that can result in a mishmash of fonts. Try and keep it to one font. As mentioned earlier, we want to take out your acronyms. Unless funder uses the acronym in the RFA or guidelines themselves, spell each acronym out, at least the first time you use it. Never assume that people know what you're talking about. To that, it's really a good idea to have someone not involved in the grant writing process, or somebody who's independent from your individual program, read the proposal for clarity. They'll be able to give you a good sense of whether or not it's understandable or clear. Funders, especially those requiring long proposals, include a proposal checklist in their request for applications or in their guidelines. So don't forget to use that and check that you have everything that they ask for. Sure, you've included each item. Have you included the required forms and completed those? Have you checked every required box? Make sure every required field and line is filled out and that you have included signatures in all the places where they're required. It's sometimes the minute details that get us. Last but certainly not least, proofread.
Some proposals are submitted online these days. How does that impact the way people write their grants?
It impacts how you write the proposal at all. You should always write, edit, and proofread your entire grant in a regular document. When it's ready to go, cut and paste it into the online template and print that out and proofread again. The online programs usually wreak havoc on formatting, and you want to be sure that in the process of cutting and pasting, you didn't leave anything out.
And then to allow time for a technological disaster, right?
Yes. Submit early, at least a couple of days before it's actually due. There are too many horror stories out there about systems crashing, both the grader system or even a funder's server crashing right when the application is due. Finally, look for an email receipt or print your confirmation so that you're sure that your application was submitted. If you have plenty of time to spare, you can fix any problems if it doesn't go through the first time or if you run into any of those disasters we mentioned.
Any reminders for those proposals that are delivered the old-fashioned way?
Absolutely. If the proposal is long, make sure you include page numbers and a header or footer with your program or agency name in it, in case pages get separated. Print proposal and check for inconvenient page breaks. You don't title at the bottom of one page and the paragraph at the top of the next. Check line. If the proposal is due on the 30th, do it need to be postmarked by 30th, or do they need it received by then? Also, check that you are sending the proposal to the right address. I know it's like a silly reminder, but it could be a really vital one if they have two addresses and you have the wrong one. And last two reminders are the same as for the online submissions. Submit early, prepare for mail or traffic disasters, and submit well before the deadline. And get a receipt or track the submission passage so you know that the proposal has been received in time.
That's all information. But to sum up, I think some of the important points I heard. Everyone begin early and have a plan that allows enough time for each component of the proposal to be well written. You should get your proposal early. You should give the funders what they want. It includes the order of the proposal, the sections to be included, and language that they use. The proposal should be complete, specific, and explicit. You should not come back with any questions. Budgets in the program should be realistic.
Exactly. Ultimately, the most important thing to remember is to give the funder exactly what they want. A written proposal for a compelling program that follows the funder guidelines to a T is the one that is most likely to be successful.
Thanks, Jenny. I know there's a lot to absorb. So if you have any questions in the chat box, we left a good bit of time for questions now. It's hard to take it all in, so we'll give you a couple minutes to compose your questions. We'll try to answer all the ones that come in. You email us with any questions. We have both our email addresses up on the screen. And if you have a chance to watch the evaluation webinar earlier this year or attend one of the trainings for logic models and setting outcomes, there'll be more information coming up on the OBS Training and Technical Assistance website in the next couple of weeks. Also, the hands for this webinar are available online, and it's just popped up on your screen, or it will pop up in a minute, sorry. Be a little box pops up if you've closed it. That should be easy for you to just click that and download a PDF. And we're planning another webinar in October on motivating staff. Late October, early November, will be held in about a month. So keep your eye out for announcements about that. The transfer box should be popping up shortly. I'll be up on your screens now.
Okay. One question that says, do you have a source for volunteer rates to use for in-kind value of volunteer time? So that's hard to say. For the most part, if you're going to use a rate for volunteer time, it should be roughly equivalent to what you would have to pay somebody to do it. That may be more obvious if your volunteer is doing accounting services for you than if somebody is coming in to help with some program services. So I just estimate on kind of your best knowledge.
Okay, someone said unable to download the handouts now. Will it be available on the OBS website? Yes, within a couple of weeks, everything should be up there for you to download. Oh, the email announcement go out once that gets uploaded to the website. Future training on strategies for effectively funding overhead and other indirect costs would be much appreciated. That is the $64,000 question. How do you get money for overhead? Most grantors want to fund services, and I know administration is necessary. They hope somebody else will pick it up. So we'll take them under advisement. I don't think we have any magic answers, but we do have a couple of others.
The individual fundraising program is the way to do it, but that takes a little bit of a while to implement. So, but we will definitely look at other strategies that we might be able to share.
Okay, then somebody else, are you planning on preparing a link for the evaluation and measurement of the goals? Yeah, the handouts from the evaluation training will be up there, and that does have some information about how to create goal outcomes and then measure them. We covered that evaluation training, but that should be available again within a couple of weeks. There'll be email going out about that. The difference between writing an application for government organizations versus private foundations.
Well, I would say it used to be they were quite different. Now I think the more that foundations go to online submissions, the government grants and the foundation grants are looking more similar. I think foundation grant proposals tend to be a little bit less specific about the very specific types of things they'll fund. You may have a little bit more leeway in including other costs and doing innovative programs. I think governments are usually very specific about what will and will not fund. But the language should be the same. You know, you should still make sure that you're being clear about what programs you're providing, what impact of those programs will be. So there shouldn't be a huge difference between the two. Those, though, may be very different based on what the guidance for each of those two things say.
I think private foundations, I think as Jenny mentioned earlier, are more likely to want to have you find sustainable systems systems, they look to start a program, not to be the ongoing sustainer for long-term. Government agencies are more willing to be long-term. There were a couple more questions about administrative salaries, administrative overhead, and we have sources. Again, as Jenny said, you know, the very best thing is to have what's called discretionary funds, meaning you can do whatever you want with it, and those are funds that you raise yourself. So and I guess one sales pitch, you know, fund development is a whole issue that we may think about in the future as a webinar, but as a quick point, if you do get foundation and government funding, then go to your community and say to raise money to match and leverage these funds, that the money if the government didn't require a match or the funder didn't require a match, we need to match it to be able to fully fund our program. You know, those funds that you raise from the community could go to administration. So come up with some kind of a long-term, ongoing, sustainable fund development plan is really the only answer. Many government grants do allow a small percentage for admin, but it's usually not enough, and some foundations are strictly program only. The evaluation handouts will be on the website within a few weeks, both these handouts and the ones for the evaluation program and the ones today.
Blake, I think you said that the slides from the evaluation webinar are currently available on the website. Is that true?
They're currently available on the VAP training webpage, and once these are completed and uploaded on our website, we will email all slides, including the reference evaluation slides, to all participants about 1 to 2 weeks.
Okay, other questions anybody has? Another minute or two, and if nothing else pops up, we'll wrap it up.
I'll go back to that question about the difference between government and foundation grants. I think one thing to make sure you look for is a lot of the foundation grants are very specific in looking for outcome and impact of your program. Some government grants are more about the outputs, how many people you would serve, and what types of programs you're serving. So if you're doing a foundation grant, make sure you're including that impact and those outcomes. Government grants, I think more and more of them are going toward that outcome-based funding, but you may have they may be more focused on the number of people you're serving.
And a quick point, outcomes. The outputs or the products, you know how many counseling sessions you're going to have and how many education programs you're going to have, and you know about how many people will show up. Those are pretty easy to predict and to meet your prediction. Outcomes are results, which are out of your control. It's a result of your service. You hope it will achieve. And everybody's used to hitting 90% of your target and 100% of your target. With outcomes, you may not. And you'll be very conservative and very careful and explaining your proposal that we're asking people in a serious crisis situation to make a major life change, and not all of them will be ready, even with our wonderful service. So we're project a lower number. We might. So again, it's hard for people to say we're only going to have a 50% rate, but if setting a high bar, 50% is a great success. So as you switch to outcomes, the results, they're out of your control. You want to be careful not to overstate it.
Question about whether there could be a webinar that shows sample grants that are acceptable and unacceptable, and something that we can talk to OVS about.
The problem with giving you sample grants is that there are so many different funders that have so many different criteria. Seeing grants had to be within 3 pages. That I've submitted, they're 100 pages long. So, I don't think we could really give you samples. What we could try to do is, if people have questions about certain sections, how do you write a section? Jay gave you a very short sample of a program narrative. A budget, we could try to put a couple little samples together of different things, but the span is broad. I'm not sure that samples we give you would be helpful. Any other questions?
If any later, our emails are up there. Feel free to send us an email or Blake an email with questions, and there'll be an evaluation that will go out.
Yeah, I want to offer a special thank you to Jen Allen for putting together today's webinar. Don't forget to take a few minutes and complete your webinar evaluation survey. That will be, as soon as you close out of WebEx, you'll automatically be redirected there. And be sure to regularly check the VP Training Center section of our OBS website, where all of the reference materials will be uploaded and saved, and also future training opportunities and updates are posted there as well. So thank you, everyone. We appreciate you coming today, and we hope you have a wonderful day. Take care.